What makes a good folding knife? Explained on a Spyderco Military. A great folding knife has a couple of things that need to be considered. Number one, construction. Construction is important. If you look at this knife, it has very few screws, and all of these are very good screws. T8 on the scales and the T10 on the pivot, which is fantastic. These are a lot bigger than your standard T6s. T6s are on a lot of knives. The problem with T6 screws is that they wear out very quickly because they're a lot cheaper, they're a lot smaller. Doesn't make this knife a bad knife. The Spyderco Stretch XL is a fantastic knife. It's just not a great construction. We used to see this a lot. A lot of knives have T6 on their construction, and it's not good, you know. I think the future of knife construction is T8s on the scales and maybe a T10 or also a T8 on the pivot. You want fewer screws and bigger screws. A company that's really good with screws, for instance, is Chris Reeve. They have really deep and really long-lasting screws. These are, I think, even made in Germany. They go above and beyond with the fewer and better screws concept. These knives, if you take them apart, they come back together almost as from factory, which is fantastic. That's how you want a construction to be. A lot of expensive knives these days have a really good construction though. For instance, Medford knives, really great screws, really good construction, really nice and tight tolerances. Not a single bit of blade play in the Slim Midi Marauder, for instance. This is a great constructed knife. If you compare that, most Seiki CD Spydercos, a lot of blade play in the pivot. That's not what you want, obviously. These Spydercos from the US made lineup, solid, absolutely solid. No blade play up and down, side to side. These are, again, like with the screws, perfectly in terms of tolerances as well. Another company that does screws really well and construction, Hindera. Hindera has a good construction, nice and deep screws, solid lockup, no wiggle at all in any direction. These are really, really well constructed knives. And as with Hindera, Medford, Spyderco, and Chris Reeve, a couple of hundred other really high quality makers on the market have the same tolerances. Chinese budget knives have taken over the world, as it seems sometimes, but that's not really the case. A lot of Chinese makers, they already started to use T8s on the construction and few screws, which is great, obviously. This knife, for instance, packed with features, but what doesn't make it great is the way it is constructed. Most of these knives, they look really good from factory, but within a week, the blade goes off-centered and you constantly have to adjust these knives. With most budget knives, the problem is that the construction is only good for the first few days, and if you use your knife every single day. These knives, in my experience, they are done within 3 to 4 years of constant use. This Spyderco Military, for instance, has been used for years and years, has never been disassembled or adjusted on the pivot. Blade centering is still perfect. The action still perfect. This knife is filthy on the inside and should be cleaned. I clean it with water from the outside. Doesn't do anything to the knife. The knife runs perfectly fine and is still centered. If a knife is done right from the beginning, you don't really need to do a lot of maintenance. Maintenance is usually only necessary on knives that have an overly complicated construction or are not made to the highest standard. This knife runs on washers. I prefer washers for longevity. They polish themselves as you open and close the knife. I compared washers from like a 7-year used Spyderco to a brand new Spyderco at one point. Same model, same Paramilitary 2 model. And the used washers didn't decrease in thickness at all. So you don't need to be worried if you only clean your knives from the outside. A well-made knife can be neglected quite a bit. Next thing is weight management. Again, the Spyderco Military serves as a great showpiece for that. It's a really big knife, but it is very thinly constructed and really lightweight for the size. There are a lot of knives that are pretty good. This Cold Steel, for instance, is a pretty good knife, but it's almost impossible to carry in the pocket because it's just so gigantic and so heavy. So weight management, not good on this knife. The Buck 110, a fantastic knife, an absolutely fantastic knife. This is one of the best cutting tools on the market in terms of the blade. The blade stock is decently thin, has a hollow grind, has a great shape for cutting, but the weight is awful. And it doesn't have a pocket clip, which the combination of those two things make it quite an awful knife to carry. Still a fantastic knife that I like quite a bit. It's just not great at the weight management thing. Now, a knife doesn't need to be super lightweight to be good. There are a lot of knives on the market that are big and heavy, but they are not too heavy, so you can still carry them. Weight management doesn't mean that the knife has to be super lightweight, but the way the weight is distributed and the way the pocket clip works and everything is a lot more important. So weight management is an important thing for a great folding knife. Manipulation of the blade is important. Manipulation of the blade, how can you cut with your blade? This is a really important aspect that a lot of people don't think about. The handle should not force you in a position, but should allow a lot of different positions for you to cut. The way you can manipulate the blade from the outside, from the handle, a very good company with that is Chris Reeve again. The Sebenza has a very neutral handle that allows different grips and allows a lot of manipulation from the handle into the blade. You want to be close to the cutting edge, not really far away, and you want to have a nice and neutral grip that holds you still safely on there. This knife, for instance, puts you in a saber grip naturally, but you can hold it in a hammer grip if you like to, so the knife does not force you in a position. You can see on the old Military here, this portion right here, unlike on the Military 2, is rounded off. So you can hold this very comfortably and adjust your grip as it's needed. You can push with your thumb on the blade, transfer energy directly to the tip, so you can again manipulate that blade in a variety of ways, which is fantastic. Hinderer knives are greatly constructed, as I said before, but they force you in a saber grip and they don't really allow you in a hammer grip comfortably. You can hold them in a hammer grip, but it's not gonna end up in a positive cutting experience. That combined with thick blades and thick behind the edge thickness is not the best for your cutting experience, which leads me right to the next thing, cutting performance. Cutting performance can be achieved by a couple of different things. You can either get a thin blade stock with a thin behind the edge geometry, so you get the maximum slicing performance. That's great for food, cardboard, all the softer materials basically. You can also get a little bit of a robuster blade stock with a thin behind the edge geometry. So you have robustness on the top, but slicing capability on the bottom. That way you can still work the blade a little bit harder without sacrificing your slicing performance. That's the best of both worlds basically. So this knife, for instance, starts off really thick, but tapers to a needle fine point, so the robustness on the spine is sacrificed here for slicing performance, which is okay if you like slicing performance, obviously. On this knife, because of the hollow grind, the blade stock thickness and the robustness is not really sacrificed because of the hollow grind. The last thing is, if you have a thick blade stock and a thick behind the edge geometry, that's the worst thing you want to have, because you end up with a wedgy geometry that doesn't cut very long and doesn't slice very efficiently. This knife is great, I love it quite a bit, but it cuts terribly compared to other knives. Still a great knife, because it's just a cool knife. It has been around forever. It picks up your scratches and patina, and it's the SOCOM Elite. It looks fantastic. So I forgive it that it's not the perfect knife. Still like it quite a bit. So yeah, that's it. Perfect knives, in my opinion, for instance, or for my life at least, are the Chris Reeve Sebenza 3121. Doesn't really matter in my opinion, and the Spyderco Military one, the Linalock version. I like the Linalock version for the more ergonomic grip and cutting performance, and this is arguably one of the best Linalocks ever done. So I like this a lot more than a military tool, but everyone is different. So these two knives for me personally would be damn near perfect folding knives, but everybody has a different life and different opinions obviously and different taste, which is good because there are so many different knives on the market, and yeah, for every taste there is something, I guess. So yeah, let me know in the comments what's your perfect folding knife. Thank you guys for watching and see you guys in another video.